it's funny. You're an anesthesiologist, and then you teach awakening, and it's like you put people to sleep and you numb people out, and then you wake people up and like make them feel more. So
Yeah,
I don't know. It's so funny. That just came up to me right
it's
now.
kind of bizarre.
So I guess you've mentioned paradox so many times, and I'm like fascinated with paradox. You write in the book, paradox isn't a side effect of awakening. The truth of the matter is that the natural state of things, let's call it reality, is by its very nature entirely paradoxical. And this resonated for me. And I actually think before I got into meditation, before I got into spirituality, psychedelics, that thought just started coming to me. Like, I don't know if it was intuition or what it was. It would just come. Life is a paradox. Life is a paradox. And I didn't know what it meant, but it just felt like super real. It just felt like it was pulling me somewhere. I'm not sure if there's much more that can be said about paradox, but maybe you have something more to add on it to it.
Well, I put that chapter was maybe the most fun one to write. It was really fun to write it, because in one way of speaking, it's probably the most accurate chapter in the book, right? The paradox says so much. It says, first of all, that you can't say anything in a way, but it also says paradoxically that you can sure say a lot, and that can point to something that's not pointable to, right? It's just paradox after paradox. But it's experienced here. It's very obvious, like the everything, when you finally see the nothingness, the empty nature of everything, strangely, only then can you experience swallowing saliva fully for the first time in your life and know the depth of that. Know that that's the whole universe doing that. Taking one step, and it's the whole universe taking a step. Now, this is absurd to the normal way of thinking, but keep waking up and you'll know what this means. It's like, holy shit, that's exactly what it is. That's everything as one step. That's a miracle. It's amazing. And it's not a miracle that Angelo performed. It's a miracle of reality doing what reality does for no one. There's paradoxes in no self, like there's the Advaita Vedanta videos where people say there's no self, there's no one to do anything, there's no seeker, there's no one that can, it's a way of teaching, and it can transmit. It can actually be a pretty powerful transmission, but it has its limits because it starts to feel fixated after a while. It starts to feel like a message that's not flexible at all. That's not how reality is. As Adyashanti says, you'll never have no sense of self whatsoever. It doesn't make sense, right? If someone calls your name and you can't even recognize that someone called your name, like, you're going to be absolutely non-functional, right? So that, at least in one sense, that's a sense of self. But the underlying sense of self as an identity structure doesn't exist at all. It's nowhere to be found and never can be. And yet you can function very easily in the practical sense. It's simple. It's not a problem. I don't have to walk around going, oh, there's no Angelo, and what happened here was, and I don't have to talk like that because there's no contradiction between the relative and absolute, between the conventional and unfiltered reality. It intermixes perfectly. In fact, they have to be one and the same to see clearly. When you see one side, you're not seeing clearly. When you see both sides at the same time, that's clarity, one way of speaking. But then when you see both sides, you can see every side at once, one side, two sides, four sides, doesn't matter, so yeah, in simple terms, for somebody who's maybe just starting out or whatever, I would just say, hey, look at the types of stories and movies that we really love. They're the ones that are paradoxical. They have massively surprising endings, and especially the ones that involve a shift in perception of the person, of what they thought was going on. Fight Club or The Matrix, or whatever. But things that are paradoxical, even literature. The book, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. The first line in the book is completely paradoxical, and yet it conveys something that you didn't have to be alive during the French Revolution to understand about your life, right? Paradox conveys so much in art and so forth. And there's a reason for that. And that is that reality itself is paradoxical, which is so wonderful.